Does a 15-year-old vehicle with only 54,000 miles on it mean that it just can't have any problems? Well, not necessarily, because I already see a problem in this case, and I got myself a kit from HondaAuto.com that'll fix this and restore the ride quality of this vehicle. Maybe you have a vehicle that is older but has a lot less miles on it, or maybe you're looking to purchase one, and maybe it's a great deal, but you look at it and overall it looks good, the front end looks good, but the rear just seems a lot lower than it should be, almost like it's been lowered. Well, it hasn't, because you look underneath and you see original springs, and that's the keyword here, original. This car is 15 years old, and these springs have been holding up the rear end of that vehicle for that much time. So whether you've driven 200,000 miles in those 15 years or 54,000 miles like this one, that's the same amount of weight to hold for that entire time. Now sure, maybe they had a little bit more wear if you drive a lot, but the weight is the same. Measuring the front of the rocker panel height off the ground is about 8.5 inches, right to where this curves up. Now measuring the rear of the rocker panel on the same side, we'll see about 7.25 inches. So that's quite the difference, and definitely not the measurement you want to see. Even without measuring, you can't even see the top of the tire, and that's definitely not supposed to look like that. Here in the front, that's quite normal. There's plenty of space. Ooh, here's an interesting piece of information that I just found. I was raising up the vehicle so I could check out the rear end. I happened to glance over at the tires and saw that they had plenty of tread left, but the date code on them says 2015. Now, that's a 10-year-old tire, and this is on all four. And for the amount of tread it has left, that tells me that for the past several years, this vehicle has not driven much. Let's talk a little bit about the symptoms that you might experience if you're having issues on the rear suspension of your vehicle. Now we're going to focus on coil spring and shock absorber, and like I already mentioned, the coil springs can get fatigued and wear out over time. They just don't hold the weight of the vehicle anymore. And when you drive it like that, you'll just basically feel like it's too heavy for itself. It can't hold itself up. Now it will negatively impact the ride quality of the vehicle. When you have a worn out shock absorber, on the other hand, even if you have a good spring, that's going to make it feel like you're just driving a trampoline down the road, because the shock absorber prevents the car from bouncing after you've gone over bumps. And with a bad shock absorber, or two really, it will bounce like a trampoline, trust me. Now when you have both of them go bad at the same time, or somewhat at the same time, which is the case here, we have weak springs and weak shocks, that's going to create a whole different scenario of problems or symptoms I should say. You'll have an unstable ride, bouncy, it'll feel like it's too heavy for itself all over the road, and overall unsafe because of that. So the springs being weak will in turn put a lot more pressure on the shocks. If that's the way that they go bad, springs first, then shocks. And you definitely don't want to ignore it, because like I said, it can be a safety concern. It will negatively affect braking, it'll affect cornering, acceleration even when the vehicle dips back as you accelerate, steering. So it's something that you want to fix as soon as you can. Looking at the front end of this vehicle, I can see that somebody replaced the two front struts, but that's only half the problem. So they tried, but you can't just do half the job and expect the whole thing to be done right. So what we have to do now is go back there, replace the worn out components so we can restore the ride quality and the safety of the entire vehicle, not just the front. I got my new parts from HondaAuto.com, 2 springs, 2 shocks. Let's get this job finished up right and the car safely back on the road. Here's a quick safety tip other than safety glasses when you're doing this kind of work. We're doing a spring and it's under tension. So I have a pull jack that's going to support the lower control arm so that when I remove all the bolts, it doesn't just go pew and shoot right out of here. You got to hold it in and kind of control the fall of it. There you go. Always remove these rubber cups here, top and bottom. Replace them if necessary, of course, but they are typically reusable. That's definitely a weak link right there. This is definitely a problem, and these areas could break completely. Like the spring will just fracture in half, and it's going to be even worse than it already was. Start bolting it back up. When you start bolts like this in, they're under tension, so I like to thread them in by hand before I put a power tool on them, because I don't know if it's cross-threading or not. If you do it by hand, believe it or not, it's pretty difficult to cross-thread this if you just turn it and let the bolt pull itself through. Whereas if you put a power tool on it, it'll just keep going no matter whether it's cross-threaded or not. Before you put new shock absorbers in, it's always recommended to prime them or start them. That way all the oils inside can mix up and they'll be ready to go. If you don't do this, you might hear some clunks over bumps once you put them in and start driving for the first maybe 100 miles or so. Tight. Remember how much effort it took to push the new shock down? Well, watch this. That is almost no effort, and it goes down and barely comes back up by itself. If I let it kind of fall down on the bottom, then it does, but can't even push its own weight up. So this is definitely going bad, and it's a good thing we're replacing both of these as well. All of our parts are installed on both sides, left and right, of course. And if you remember prior, we had a measurement of -1¼ inches, which means the rear was actually lower than the front by 1¼ inches. So let's measure it now, and it looks like we have, to the same spot that I measured prior, 8¼ inches on the front. Let's measure the rear. And same spot in the rear, we are at 9 inches. So that's a positive difference of 3/4 of an inch. The fact that the rear is a little bit higher than the front is actually totally normal because the vehicles are designed so that when you have some weight in them, which is most of the time when you're driving, it actually sits level. So our kit from oneauto.com fixed the problem. And remember, when you're looking at a vehicle, mileage is not everything.